dedicated to each and every one of you who appreciate a great glass of wine. You know what I mean?
It's Monday. Let's raise a glass to the beginning of another week. It's time to unscrew, uncork, or saber a bottle, and let's begin exploring the wine glass. Today on the podcast, I am sharing a recording from a virtual tasting that I attended, hosted by the New York Wine and Grape Foundation. When we hear Finger Lakes wine, I think the majority of us immediately think of Riesling. And although the Finger Lakes makes quality Riesling, there is another white grape that does exceptionally well there, Chardonnay. In fact, it is the second most widely planted variety in the region. The tasting was moderated by Dan Belmont, American wine expert and WSET L3 certified. I was sent 3 samples of Chardonnay from Osmo Wine Company, Damiani Wine Cellars, and Houndstree Wines. Alongside the Chardonnay, I received cheddar cheese from Cabot Cheese, a complement of different cheddar cheeses that will pair perfectly with the 3 Chardonnays. Thank you to the New York Wine and Grape Foundation, Cabot Cheese for sponsoring the class, and to the wineries Osmo Wine Company, Damiani Wine Cellars, and Houndstree Wines for allowing me to participate. Listen in as we hear about cool climate Chardonnay and how much the Finger Lakes has to offer. Slancha! Hey everybody, I'm Lori Budd, a UC Davis winemaking program, someday service, champagne specialist, and WSET Level 2 graduate. You can find Exploring the Wine Glass on all the socials, as well as your favorite podcast catchers. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to swipe, subscribe, rate, and review. I promise I'll never tell you what to drink, but I'll always share what's in my glass.
To New York Wines Online, Chardonnay, the other white grape with Dan Belmont. To begin today's webinar, I would like to introduce Dan Belmont. Dan has spent hundreds of classroom hours thrilling guests with wine and cheese education on both sides of the Atlantic. He fell in love with wine visiting the Finger Lakes wine region in New York State and has since worked as a brand ambassador and hospitality consultant for several notable Finger Lake producers and the statewide industry, and judged the New York State Wine Classic in 2019. Dan is a certified American wine expert and holds the Level 3 certification in wines and spirits from the WSET. His decade plus of experience is the engine behind his latest work, Good Wine, GoodPeople.com, delivering good wine UK-wide. Previously, he led the education departments of New York City's famed Murray's Cheese, the largest artisan cheese retailer in the U.S., and Bedales of Borough, a trio of London wine bars. Excited to have you with us today, Dan. I hand the mic to you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Hi, everybody. Happy Wednesday. Good afternoon and welcome. Thanks for the kind introduction, really. I am a New York native of Eastern Long Island, a longtime resident of Astoria, Queens. Let's go Mets. It's been a rough couple weeks, but let's go Mets. Other news, exciting stuff from across the pond in London, where I currently reside. We just launched the New York bottleshop.co.uk, and I boast the largest by-the-bottle offering of New York State wine in the United Kingdom, and it's all powered by Good Wine, Good People. We stock 2 incredible Chardonnays. I fell in love with wine in New York, the people, the community. My experience there has created the lens through which I see the rest of the wine world. But enough about me. I am obviously thrilled to be here. We've got such a fun topic and even better company. The theme of today's tasting is Chardonnay, the other white grape. And we hope that the session is a great introduction to the New York State regions, styles, producers, and wines. Chardonnay was first successfully cultivated by Charles Fournier and Dr. Constantine Frank in the late 1950s at Gold Seal Vineyards in the New York Finger Lakes region. Chardonnay is the state's second most widely planted Vitis vinifera European grape variety, behind Riesling. And while Riesling often takes the spotlight, I am so glad that Chardonnay is getting its moment in the sun with this webinar today. I recently took an unofficial poll of my social media community, which is chock full of trade professionals, and I asked, what do you think of when you think of New York State wine? And Chardonnay was mentioned mentioned nearly as much as Riesling, which is super good news. Sparkling wine also widely mentioned, and I think Chardonnay obviously plays a big role there too. It is a versatile grape that pairs perfectly with food and summer days. And so to introduce our esteemed guests, the producers of the wines in today's flight, also in the order in which we will taste them. We have Ben Riccardi, who is the owner and winemaker of Osmote. And we are tasting the 2018 Chardonnay from Seneca Lake in the Finger Lakes. We are also joined by Alex Rosanelli, winemaker of Houndstree Wines, with their 2017 Estate Chardonnay from Long Island. And we are joined by Jeremy Broshiers, representing Damiani Wine Cellars, with their 2019 Chardonnay from the Finger Lakes. So we want this tasting to be a conversation, not just between myself and the panelists, but with you, our guests too. So please pop any questions you may have about the specific wines or otherwise into the chat box, and we will make every effort to answer them as we go along. If I decide we can tackle it better later on, I will table it, but we will make sure to get to everyone's questions during the session. I'm always happy to talk wine and cheese, and I know that many of you have Cabot samples on hand. So please let us know which cheeses are singing with these Chardonnays. Finally, a big thank you to our hosts, the New York Wine and Grape Foundation at New York Wines, newyorkwines.org, as well as the three producers joining us today. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first guest, Ben Riccardi, who's the winemaker and owner of Osmo Wine Company, which is based in the Finger Lakes on the northeast side of Seneca Lake. And we are going to kick this flight off with the 2018 Seneca Lake Chardonnay. Ben, how you doing, mate?
I'm well, thanks.
Good. Thank you for joining us. Yeah, pleasure to have you, really. So Ben, take a couple minutes, introduce yourself, introduce the brand, and introduce today's wine.
Yeah, terrific. Ben Riccardi. So I'm from the Finger Lakes. I grew up outside of Ithaca and studied vineyard management at Cornell, and then traveled the world a whole bunch to learn as much as I could about winemaking. And with all that hopping back and forth between countries and hemispheres, and I came to realize that I grew up in one of the great gems of the winemaking world. So while I was the production winemaker for City Winery in Manhattan back in 2014, I concurrently started to make Osmo wine. I saw an opportunity. I had a 2010 Ravines Chardonnay on a trip back home from the city, and I was really pretty gobsmacked with this wine and thought texturally it was really compelling and very interesting. And I looked at my own experience, having worked with really phenomenal Chardonnay producers like Craigie Range in New Zealand and William Sellum in Sonoma. I thought, man, like everyone where I live is really focused on Riesling, and I'm seeing that there's a tremendous potential for Chardonnay. And I think I have some of the skills, the tools, the knowledge from my travels to really make an impact and stand out and do something different, and just really add to the conversation. And it was really important to me, especially around 2014. There was like a risk of hydraulic fracturing for like oil. That was questioned if that was going to happen in New York State, and people thankfully really banded together and worked to keep this place clean and serene, and did a very good thing there. But it was a gut check to me, and in a moment as tasting great Chardonnay, knowing that I like Chardonnay a lot, have something to offer to it, and that I could do something in work that will really preserve and promote agriculture and, keeping the Finger Lakes, keeping upstate New York green and sustainable. So, everything aligned, and that, there we were. We started. At first I was just making wine by contract in someone else's winery. And then 2017, I moved up here, continued to do that, increased the scale of it, got over 1,000 cases. And eventually, after the 19 harvest, I was so big that since 2020, I've been in my own production space, and I'm making about, about 2,000 cases of wine per year. I would say at least a third of that is Chardonnay. I also have taken a keen interest in some of the more historical grapes from the region, some of the hybrids. What I like to think of as heirloom varieties, the varieties that kind of like pillared the region before we realized the real potential that we had with vinifera, things like Chardonnay and Riesling.
Sure.
And I do a little, Cab Franc and stuff, and it seems to be going well. We're for sale in the UK, Japan, and all across the US.
It's awesome, mate. Congratulations. What does the word osmote mean?
Yeah, so I say it means to move naturally towards balance, and I thought, taking the word osmosis, taking a water word, and from science, and I thought it could really encapsulate some of the magic of the Finger Lakes, because in reality, where we are is it's too cold a place to really grow grapes. Things are changing, but we have some extremes here, which on paper mean that we shouldn't be able to do what we do, but because we are the Finger Lakes, and lakes carved by a glacier millions of years ago that are of such an incredible depth, ultimately is so much water that they don't freeze, and that little bit of heat that comes off the water naturally balances our vineyards. So the whole region is like osmote, moving naturally towards balance. And then the word kind of makes sense for a lot of my winemaking philosophy too, because while I don't think it's fair to say I'm a natural winemaker, but I really trust in indigenous ferments. I believe that there's an ecosystem in the vineyard, and it comes into the winery on the skins of your grapes, and if you trust it and foster it, the wine will make itself. So a naturally balanced environment, osmote through and through.
Awesome. That's great. Why don't you tell us about the wine that everyone has today? So we got the 2018 Chardonnay.
Yeah. So say the fourth vintage of Chardonnay. Beautiful textural wine, and as I had mentioned before, I like to trust in indigenous fermentation. So I have always a really long and slow fermentation process, and that's taking place in very large oak barrels, like 400 liters. So
when
like 200 something gallons. There's Sade in the winery. She's the godmother of all things great in Chardonnay. Keeps me running as a smooth operator. And those are the big barrels. And here I am inspecting some Chardonnay. And 18 was a really difficult year in the vineyard, but Chardonnay is a really terrific grape in that situation, because it's one that you harvest early. So I think I was able to catch what was like a real kind of life-saving Indian summer in 2018, and get the grapes off early, capture a sense of phenolic tension with the high acid earlier picked grapes, and I really like to put some emphasis on that that tension, that, and sense of verve. So I whole cluster press the grapes and really use all of the juice. There's no press fractioning. I like that little bit of grip that comes from pressing the grape just a little bit harder towards the finish. And I think you can feel in this wine there's a lot of fatness, and even picking early, there's a lot of richness and ripeness. It carries the weight of this wine, carries oak really, really well. There's a fair, there's always a fair amount of newer oak in my Chardonnay program, but the structure, the richness, the layers of the fruit, and the long, slow ferment in oak, it all integrates really nicely, I think. And with all that richness and that fatness, that tension, that phenolic bite at the finish is really pleasing and refreshing, I think.
And when you say that it's a long, slow fermentation, give folks an idea of how long we're talking about, because I know when you start to drag that fermentation out, it could get a bit nail biting, and there's a ton of producers out there that don't have that kind of patience.
Now I have a baby, so I never sleep, but you just gotta trust the process. Like at this point, we got so much technology and ways to monitor stuff, and people have been doing this for centuries. Like, strive to work with clean fruit, treat it gently and with respect, and you put it in those barrels. It kind of it will make itself. It can be a nail biter, but I've been pretty lucky. Does
it slow down as things get colder into the winter? You pushing it
down long? Yeah. I'm in my second facility, but through the history of Osmo, I've always been in really pretty rustic winemaking environments. So really, I pick usually like first or second week in October. Like I said, 18 was kind of an Indian summer. So, I had some heat to work with, get the fermentation going. And ultimately what happens, it just, it gets so cold, and it starts to affect my barrel room. And then a real like seasonality takes over, and the barrels kind of go to sleep. And, I keep them topped up. I smell them all, every other week. Taste them, smell them, monitor them, and usually I'll hard bung them, even though I know that they still have some energy in them. And then come springtime, you start to see like a crocus or a daffodil or something popping up, and you better go to the winery. Yeah. You probably have bungs popping out of your barrel, and then that's just the magic of it, and why I say just like trust it. There's a magic. There's something that happens, and the ferments, they finish in springtime. It's pretty wild.
So Ben, we got a couple of questions coming through. The first is from David Sitt, and we have: why did you decide to make two stylistically different Chardonnays? Did the grapes themselves help you determine the styles, or did you have two styles in mind and then sought out grapes to fit said styles?
Yeah. So the Seneca Lake oak Chardonnay, which you're drinking right now, comes from the east side of Seneca, that appreciates more of the afternoon sun, ripens pretty well. And the vineyards are sloped and steeper, and they're on a glacial soil, so alluvial, gravelly soil. This is a soil that drains water better. So and then the slope helps the water move away from the vine. So ultimately, these vines, the Seneca Lake fruit ripens earlier. Berry size is a little bit smaller, really nice goldy, rich flavors in this, and a sense of structure that I always felt would pair really well with an oak regime, especially, you know, a very large format oak regime where the touch of the oak is more gentle. And then I wanted to also make a lighter, more fruity style of Chardonnay, and I looked to Cayuga Lake fruit sources, and I am sourcing from beautiful vineyards on the west side of the lake. Appreciate more of the morning sun, and they're flatter sites. I really find on Cayuga Lake, the sites that I've worked with have a little more energy in the ground. There's a little more clay content. They hold water. Berries are a little bit bigger and speak to me with like fruit and freshness. And I try to keep it light. I don't over adorn it, and just let the fruit speak for itself. You know, fermented all the way in stainless steel, no oak.
Great. And then Patricia was curious, and this is specifically to the wine that we're tasting today. Do you put all of it through malolactic fermentation, or is it just kind of whatever happens?
Yeah, in my winery, it's kind of whatever happens. The 2018 is a total malolactic fermentation, but the wine gets its whole life in the barrel on gross lees, so like a heavy sediment.
Yep.
And I told you that I usually am finding the barrels fermenting into the springtime with the primary fermentation. So I get this. I go through a full malolactic, but I find that it never really comes out as overly buttery, because the wine is always alive, and that butteriness of a malolactic fermentation kind of gets re-fermented back into the wine, becomes something else. And it's all part of like building layers and creating complexity. So when you smell my wines, sometimes it can be difficult to say like, oh, I smell pineapple, or like one thing doesn't stick out. But I kind of like the subtlety of it, because actually you smell so many things, and because you can't put a finger on any single one, it really starts to speak then of complexity, and then it slams on the by the glass program, because everyone wants that second glass to figure out.
Well, yeah, there is a ton going on. I'm getting, there's dairy notes, there is fruit notes, there's definitely something green and herbaceous in there too. And it's really a lovely wine. Julio wants to know what are your favorite food pairings for this one?
Whatever my baby's eating.
There you go. Yeah, exactly. Good for you, mate. So I wanted to, I have one more question. I think I know the answer on this, and then I want to just kind of open it up to Jeremy and Alex and see if they have any questions for you, just because we've got, a little meeting of the minds here, and to take advantage of that. But, is Chardonnay still, is it, or was it ever cool? Is it cool? What do you say to the ABCs, those anything but Chardonnay folks?
Thank you. It is a massive opportunity for me. Like, you scared everyone else in this region away from Chardonnay, and I came in as a 20-something, and because I was looking left while everyone else was looking right, I got into really good old vineyards with nice vine age, and I don't believe in the ABC thing, to be honest with you. I mean, in the 4 years that I lived in New York, I feel like I saw Chardonnay on like every wine list, and sommeliers whom I respected, they drank Chardonnay and turned me on to great Chardonnay. And, having worked, like working in New Zealand, Craggy Range, tasting Kumia River, and then Australia, you got like Giaconda and Sean Smith and Toll Puddle. I had incredible Chardonnays, and everyone was so excited about that. So yeah, I knew that if I made it, I'd be able to sell it, and I had a lot of passion for it. It's something I care about, and again, it was a huge opportunity, and by starting there instead of Riesling, I got great fruit sources.
Yeah. So do you consider Chardonnay to be your flagship variety? Do you think of it that way? You don't. It's okay if you don't. Just curious.
I do. I mean, it's what I based the brand on. It's all I made for the first two vintages, but now I'm like the hipster winemaker, I guess, because I started making pet nat and people love pet nat. And I took, like I said, I took an interest in historical varieties and kind of re-empowering older vineyard managers and putting a renewed interest on older hybrid vineyards and so I've been doing that stuff too, and people have taken a real shine to it. So
it's awesome. Yeah. Jeremy, Alex, any questions for Ben? Any thoughts on the wine?
Well, another stunner, Ben, as always. Not that I ever expect any less from your Chardonnay. I'm truly a fan and have always been. Thank you, and I don't think I ever told you this, but a couple of years ago, when I first was introduced to your Chard, I introduced it to my mother, who is a Chardonnay gal to the bone. And she's where I inherited my love of Chardonnay for sure. And she's subsequently become a huge fan as well. So I will be probably sharing the remainder of this bottle after I leave here with her this afternoon. So thank you for sharing. Really, yeah, but again, really beautiful. I love it. It's got almost, I really love the kind of spice component to it. And I'm guessing that's probably from the new oak. Are you using exclusively French barrels, right? French oak, 100%?
Yeah, I use only French oak. I really only use Dargouet Jaegal, which is a nice, like a Burgundy Cooper. It's what I used with Pinot and Chardonnay in New York City, and I developed a real fondness for it. It's a water-bent barrel instead of a fire-bent barrel, so I think it brings oak into wine really, really gently.
Yeah, it's really, really beautiful.
I'm seeing Amberjack Carpaccio with this. Someone's having an incredible Tomo. Oh, my man, he's having. Right.
I was sad to see my question picked up because Ben, I'm a huge fan of your Chardonnay as well. I was wondering if you could talk, I know a little bit off topic, but a little bit more about the site and kind of how those two different sites work in those two wines. I know one a little more clay and limestone, one more alluvial. Other than aspect, do you share any other thoughts around kind of terroir for Chardonnay in general in the Finger Lakes, or specifically in vineyards that you're working with, or anything you look for in particular in a Chardonnay vineyard?
This is an excellent question. Definitely, as I said, soil structure and aspect make me think about how I want to approach this wine in the winery, or approach the grapes in the winery. I think that a terroir definitely can speak to one wine style more than another. As I'm selecting fruit, I'm going to more established vineyard managers, and kind of lucky to get what I can get. I have a great site in Burdett on the east side of Seneca Lake, which is again alluvial gravel soil with a nice slope to it, getting that afternoon sun, and I'm very much looking forward to planting Chardonnay there, and perpetuating the Seneca oak regime style.
I hope that
your question. It's a very thoughtful question.
So let's actually pivot. Ben, thank you so much. We're going to pivot over to Alex, just in the interest of time. And I think we're going to have more questions for everybody at the end as well. So we'll definitely hear from you again. But I want to introduce Alex again. We have Alex Rosanelli from Houndstree Wines, and he's got the 2017 Estate Chardonnay. Alex, please introduce yourself, introduce the brand, and introduce the wine. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. So we've been in operation since 2015, relatively young brand. We farm 30 acres of estate vineyard on the east end of Long Island, of which about 10 acres is planted to Chardonnay. It's actually our largest planting by acreage. So we've been working with Chardonnay since day one, and one of my favorite varieties to work with, in general. This past year, we opened our first tasting room, which is located in Williamsburg in Brooklyn. In addition to our Chardonnay, we make and grow at our estate vineyard Merlot, Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon, classic Bordeaux varieties for the east end of Long Island. So Chardonnay is the only white variety that we work with, not the second white variety that we work with. So it's been really core to our project and our core white wine. Since 2016, we've planted a couple other varieties on the vineyard and look forward to working with those in the future. One of them being Marsanne and Roussanne, which will be our other estate white wine. So Chardonnay's been a lot of fun to work with. It's a favorite variety of mine. And we're really excited to have it today. So it's been exciting to see so many great Chardonnays popping up. I mean, we've been seeing more of them from the Finger Lakes as well, and then it's really been a core variety on the east end of Long Island where we are. So excited to be having this conversation.
It's awesome. Why don't you tell everybody about the wine that we're tasting today, the 2017?
And now a word from our sponsor. Did you know that Dracaena Wines has a wine club? We named it the Chalk Club. Draco is on our label, but Vegas was getting a bit jealous, so we decided he deserved to be our wine club spokesdog. In Las Vegas, betting chalk means that you are betting on all of the favorites, and we're gambling that once you taste our wines, we will become one of your favorite wineries. The club is simple, yet a bit different than most. We don't ask for a lot of commitment like others do. Choose between 3 tiers. The Sweet 16, where you'll receive 3 bottles twice a year and get 25% off all orders. Sign up for the Elite 8 and get 30% off all orders and receive 4 bottles twice a year. Or make it to the Final 4 and receive 6 bottles twice a year, as well as receiving 35% off all purchases. All tiers receive discounted shipping, are customizable, and are eligible for unlimited referral bonuses. Add $15 to your bank for each person you refer. Head to www.dracaenawines.com or the link in the show notes to find out all the Chalk Club has to offer and to sign up. We've stocked the odds so that you can get our award-winning wines without breaking the bank.
Yeah, absolutely. So 2016-17, same method of production for these wines. So it's 100% estate fruit, and we source the fruit from a single block at our vineyard, which is Dijon Clone 95. Some of the oldest Dijon Clone vines on the East End. These were planted in 1996, which is not that old in the grand scheme of things, but for East Coast wines and for Dijon Clone Chardonnay, it's been cool to work with some relatively older vines for that. This wine, we do in a couple different harvests. So we do a sequential pick. It's not a single pick. I generally like the kind of tension that the earlier picks bring to the wines in terms of acidity, and then really doing some of those later picks in terms of physiological maturity of the fruit. In terms of the region, North Fork, Long Island, compared to someplace like the Finger Lakes, longer growing season, more moderate maritime climate surrounded by water. So really that kind of, Indian summer effect as well, but really stretching into the fall. So our last pick for this wine is probably sometime in mid or early October. We really get that long hang time for that kind of full physiological maturity of the fruit, those really kind of golden skins. And Ben mentioned something in his conversation about kind of phenolic tension and that kind of extraction. That's something we always look for as well. So while some of those earlier picks we're doing whole cluster pressing, just really focusing on that kind of minerality and bright tartness of the juice to add a little bit of kind of backbone to the wine. In those later picks, which are kind of the bulk of the wine by volume, we really are kind of pushing extraction, sometimes a little bit of a soak, sometimes just with that kind of incorporation of the press fraction, really kind of pushing that kind of phenolic extraction into the wine to give it that texture structure. I think one of the things that I love about Chardonnay, particularly from the East End, is it really does highlight as a variety kind of the sense of place, and we are surrounded by water, and there is always this kind of maritime quality and the salinity to a lot of the wines. So in general, I try, this is an unoaked wine. It is partially barrel fermented, which I'll speak to in a second, but I really do kind of want to keep the fruit itself at the center of the wine and keep that focus on the fruit that we're growing in our estate vineyard and the vintage and the terroir of the site. But really, I think the ripening and the way we handle the wine does kind of push past kind of primary fruit aromatics. So we're not necessarily looking for that kind of clean, crisp, like apple or pear, looking more to kind of go past that to get into kind of, more honeyed tones, and then looking to kind of bring out some of the savoriness that I think we experience in Long Island in general, which is kind of this kind of green olive note or dried herbal note, definitely more of those kinds of green as well as honeyed tones, adding a lot of kind of complexity and interest to the wine, along with kind of white floral elements. So, that's been kind of a core element for us, and then kind of marrying that phenolic extraction with a little bit of barrel fermentation, with lees aging, although without using new oak.
Okay, cool. I actually, so on your back label, it mentions acacia barrels.
Acacia,
Tell me about those. Tell us about why, and then the what. What's the result from that compared to let's say French oak?
Yeah, 100%. So we actually use D&J acacia barrels, as Ben mentioned, D&J, the cooperage. So it's acacia. So it's a different type of tree from oak. It's acacia tree. So these same French cooperages that bring in French or Hungarian oak and make barrels in France are bringing in French-grown acacia wood. They're seasoning it and curing it in the same way that they would new oak. So we use about 30% of this wine is fermented in acacia barrel. Most of that being new, some of that being older acacia. What I really like about it is it allows for a barrel fermentation in a new barrel without adding any oak flavor. So it has similar kind of tannin structure and adds similar phenolics to what you get out of oak, but doesn't have any of the kind of vanilla or kind of other types of flavors that would generally come out of oak wood. So it's adding some of that tannin contribution. It's also more porous than oak, and as oak barrels get older, they actually become less and less porous as they become less and less neutral. And I really like kind of that micro-oxygenation that happens in a new barrel, particularly when you're fermenting on gross lees or on juice lees, which is something that I like to do and do for this wine in particular. So I am looking to that oxygen to help evolve and mature the wine and kind of really bring out some of those more kind of secondary type of aromatics rather than that primary fruit. So I think the acacia does that really well in the sense that you get that kind of micro-oxygenation of the wine, and at the same time are getting a little bit of that tannin contribution, and which I think marries really well, particularly with the tannin extraction from the skins of the grapes to get that kind of marriage of wood tannin and berry skin tannin, while not covering up the wine with any types of flavors of vanilla or oak, because I really do want to kind of keep the focus of this wine in particular on the fruit. And I think it is a technique that I had worked with in Oregon, working with Pinot Gris, which is typically not an oak variety. And I wanted to bring it in here because I was really liking the flavors that I was seeing in oak Chardonnays from the North Fork, Long Island, particularly when they had significant bottle age. So I'd see bottles that were, 10 years old plus, and was really finding this really kind of beautiful herbaceous character, this salinity, this savoriness to the wines, kind of after the oak had this long period of time to kind of integrate and almost go away. And I wanted to see if I could bring out some of that and really focus on that as the primary focus of the wine, as the expression of the terroir, rather than kind of need to keep it for 10 years in bottle to kind of integrate away some of those oak flavors. So wanted to kind of keep it focused on that fruit while bringing in that tannin balance, that structure, that kind of richness from barrel fermentation, and kind of the development of the aromatics that happens from the oxygenation.
Super cool. You've pretty much answered my question that I had lined up for you, and that it's great. But Chardonnay is often referred to as a winemaker's grape, and I think this is kind of also my retort to those ABC folks, and my wife included. But you could slip in a Chablis in there, and she wouldn't know the difference. So it's great. It's got very notable versatility, right? And so when someone says, "Oh, I don't drink Chardonnay," for me, it's like, it's like telling me you don't like music, right? There is a Chardonnay out there for everybody. You might not have found it yet, but I promise it exists. And so, it's kind of a chicken and an egg question. What comes first? Are you managing the grapes to make a certain style, or are you making a certain style based on the grapes that you achieve from any given vintage?
Yeah, definitely. Right. So, it is a chicken and egg, right? And I think it depends on kind of how you think about Chardonnay and how you think about the best expression. And for me, what it always comes down to in terms of thinking about what the best version of a wine is, or what I'm trying to do with the wine is how can it express something unique about the place where it's grown, right? Because that for me is the brilliance of wine in general and the magic of wine, and also, of Chardonnay, right? It's this wine, it's this variety that's planted all over the world and has these unique expressions in different terroirs and climates. Ben mentioned a whole bunch of great producers all over the world, and I think that's something that's really fascinating and awesome about Chardonnay. And I think when I approached this wine in 2015, which was my first year farming this vineyard, was, what do we want to do with the Chardonnay? I could make 15 Chardonnays. I could make 15 Chardonnays that would all be different wines, right? What can I do with Chardonnay that's really going to be a unique reflection of this place and is going to say something that's unique, and it's going to be a wine that's going to showcase, at least at some level, that it couldn't have been made somewhere else, right? That this is a wine that's going to be reflective of its environment. And I think that was really core to me. And that was really kind of what got me thinking about the different elements, right? And some of the things I love about the North Fork of Long Island is that you can achieve this really high level of physiological maturity in the fruit and ripeness in the fruit while retaining acidity and this really bright kind of pop of tartaric acidity. And then also that you can really ripen those skins and get that phenolic extraction while having to be ripe and round and not green or harsh in any kind of way. And also that the wines lend themselves to this savoriness or to this saltiness. So I really kind of wanted to harness all of those different things, push the ripeness, push the extraction while retaining balanced alcohol, bright acidity, and really kind of leaning into that kind of savory, salty, herbaceous, floral character that I think is really interesting and unique to the maritime climate that we have on the east end of Long Island.
Awesome. So I want to open it back up to Jeremy and Ben and see if they have any questions for you or comments on the wine. Also, Patricia posed a question, which I think you just answered, but and I can kind of open it up to the group. Does Chardonnay actually express its origins? And so she just said, she says it's pretty much, we could spend 2 hours on this alone. So
yeah, I think Chardonnay does express its origins. I think, look, I think people can nitpick the definition of terroir and expression and there are much more informed opinions on whether you can taste the difference between two prestigious vineyards right next to each other. I'm not going to weigh in on that topic. What I am going to say is that the growing condition of the vine 100% has an impecular where there are just so many unique elements to our climate that just really, really drive the style of the wine, right? Whether it's, and all driven by our terroir, our land, our soil, our aspect, our, particularly for us, the water that surrounds us and the Atlantic currents that bring, through the jet stream, that Gulf Stream that bring warm water up north. So our water stays warm. It's shallow. We're surrounded by it. That means it's humid. It means that we have low diurnal variation, low evapotranspiration of the plant. Those plants retain that tartaric acid because it's not being titrated out by water uptake. It means the vines are ripening 24 hours a day enzymatically as opposed to shutting down overnight with a 30-degree temperature drop. It means that our growing season is going from late April into October. All of these things have a huge impact. I'm not going to go and say that the specific soil, any one mineral or any one element of the soil is going to be reflected specifically in the glass, but those kind of microclimatic and mesoclimatic elements really do, I think, show up in the wine. And I think in certain varieties like Chardonnay that are adaptable to so many different environments, you can really see that specifically and in really kind of like a fine-tooth way. Whereas in some more finicky varieties, it just wouldn't grow in one variety, in one climate or another.
Yep. Very good. Jeremy, Ben, any thoughts, questions?
Well, Alex, again, thank you for sharing as well. It's really, really cool story. Congratulations on the new tasting room, by the way.
Thank you.
Hope that's going. You said that was 2019.
Yeah, it's been interesting. Our original start date was supposed to be early March of 2019, so we ended up pushing back and opened finally in September. So it's been an 18 months for sure. But glad.
Yeah, that.
And I'm here now, so I apologize if you hear like a truck or anything going by on Bedford Ave. Beautiful Chardonnay. Very cool to see you guys like so hyper focused and like 1/3 of the vineyard is Chardonnay. That's really cool. Really interesting aromatics. I don't know if I've been able to like put my finger on it yet, but it's really beautiful. And you said this was 100% stainless steel. No, so this is two-thirds stainless steel, 1/3 that acacia barrel fermentation.
Oh, right, the acacia barrel, right. Yes, I'm wondering if that's the aromatics I'm picking up. But
I like that. I like that there's no one aromatic specifically. I think one of the things that I love in Chardonnay tastings in general is when you go through and and you're getting these savory elements or herbaceous elements that aren't fruit driven, right? And you're getting notes of caraway or notes of whatever. And so that's what I really wanted to do with this wine in particular. I think one of the as a relative newcomer to the east end of Long Island in terms of being a winemaker and a wine grower out there, I really wanted kind of a priori to not do, there's so many great stainless steel Chardonnays in the east end of Long Island. They're just like beautiful apple pear. There's so many great barrel fermented Chardonnays in the east end of Long Island that are super classic and run the gamut from being Burgundian to being kind of in a new California style, that I really wanted to try and add a different voice to that conversation while still kind of presenting a wine and making a wine that was really specific to its sense of place, but really different from the other wines that I saw being made, which are in much more classic styles.
Well, for my money, I think that you nailed that for sure. This is really beautiful, very unique. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, Alex, I feel like I can get a sense of some of that skin contact and this waxiness in the aromatics, and it's really compelling and interesting. And you said something that means a lot to me as well. In that you appreciate when someone says like, I can't, like it's not like just banana, like there's all these other things. Yeah, it's like that's what we're going for, man. Like I'm trying to give you complexity, and it doesn't, it's not wine by numbers, and this by no means this really makes you think, and it kind of slows your day down, and I think that's what it's all about, and I think that's what draws me to Chardonnay. And your bottles delivering that.
Yeah, I think that I'm really stuck in. You mentioned olives in before, and I've been really stuck on that ever since you said it, and I find it fascinating. It's really great. And we have some more questions piling up. I'm going to save them for the end because I do want to get to our third wine. But it's also interesting. Both Ben, Alex, in this kind of not being able to put a wine into a tight little package. I think that is also very true of New York State, right? And I think it's a challenge that I think a lot of people try to, again, say, is, New York just Riesling? Is it just Cabernet Franc? And obviously there's just too much going on to kind of pigeonhole it like that. And I think that if you also take a step back and you make that your winemaking approach as well, I mean, we're limitless, right? And I think you're going to make some super fascinating wines, and they're going to keep being awesome. So thank you very much. Really good. I want to introduce our last panelist once more, Mr. Jeremy Brochiers from Damiani Wine Cellars, also on the east side of Seneca. Jeremy, how you doing, buddy?
Great, Dan. Thank you very much for having me. I know that it's supposed to be Glenn, one of the owners of the operation today, but he had something come up, so I'm stepping in. I am woefully not the winemaker, so you will forgive me for not getting as technical as Ben and Alex did. but I'm the tasting room manager here at Damiani. I've been with these guys for 4 years now. It's been 4 years as of this week, in fact. Cool.
Congratulations. Happy anniversary.
Thanks. So, so I'm a Finger Lakes native. Like Ben, I grew up outside of Ithaca on Cayuga Lake as well. Though I spent about half my life in New York City. My family's from Queens. So appreciate the Mets statement, Dan. Thank you very much for that. That kind of set the tone for me for this thing.
Backslide this season, though, huh?
Yeah, well, we don't have to talk. Well, it's a good thing we're drinking. We'll put it that way. So like I mentioned to Ben before, I have a lifetime love of Chardonnay. It's one of those things that I almost get a little pushy in the tasting room about it when people sort of scoff or skip it, like, oh, I don't drink Chardonnay, like Dan, you pointed out, ABC, right? So I get a little, you try it, you might like it, sort of, so I feel a little pushy in that way sometimes, but I also really love turning people on to Chardonnay because I think for a lot of people, they're just not familiar with the depth and breadth of the variety, and I feel like that's very true of a lot of American wine consumers in particular, where, they know big brands and they know, box wine from the West Coast and whatever. But so I've been a long time fan of the Damiani Chardonnay for a lot longer than I've worked here. I love the balance. Phil Eris, our winemaker, and I'm going to steal some verbiage from Ben. He was talking about balance a lot, and that's definitely key for our Chardonnay program, which has definitely been a journey. So the winery opened in 2004. Lou Damiani and Phil Davis, the founding fathers. Lou was the winemaker, Phil's the grower and vineyard manager. The whole premise of the Damiani, well, I can't call it an experiment anymore, but the experiment at the time in the mid 90s, late 90s was, let's plant the kinds of things that we like to drink. And it just kind of took off from there. So Chardonnay has been something that these guys have been making since the inception of the winery. So over 20 years of making Chardonnay at this point. And, I really think that it's grown. And like I said, it's been a journey for sure. We've experimented with different barrels over the years. This does a barrel fermentation, by the way. So this does primary fermentation out of barrel, secondary fermentation in generally second or third use French oak with a little neutral oak worked in there. This particular vintage is 3/4 natural ferment and then 25% inoculated. And I can pull the tech sheet if you really want to know yeast strains and things like that. We can get into it. So for us, Chardonnay has always been sort of near and dear to the program. In this region where the Finger Lakes is essentially synonymous with Riesling, it's really beautiful to sort of turn people on to, aptly put, the other white grape, Chardonnay. Now, for me, as a serious sparkling wine fanatic, I'll say, I can't talk about Chardonnay without talking about sparkling wine. And for years and years, whereas, now that the Rieslings coming out of the Finger Lakes are sort of on the world stage and getting some serious acclaim, I've been of the opinion for many years now that sparkling wine and Chardonnay along with it is going to be sort of the next big thing for the region for sure. Because like Ben said, it's early harvest fruit. This particular 19 harvest actually ran a little long. So we actually harvested this fruit first week of October, if I'm remembering correctly. So we actually had this really beautiful maturity on the fruit. Like I said, it's always 100% French oak. So we've dabbled with Hungarian in the past. Bosway is the sort of Cooper that we're working with that we kind of fell in love with over the past few years. 2019 was a really special vintage because we actually saw, and I think it's in one of the slides, it was our first ever reserve white wine bottling. It was the 2019 Chardonnay Reserve. We actually did two puncheons worth. So it was about 46 cases of wine in total. But Dan, to your question, I know that, for us, we source a lot of fruit. Majoritively, it's all East Side Seneca Lake, all from what we refer to as the Banana Belt, which is sort of the fun, cheeky nickname for the warm. There's that black label, beautiful reserve Chardonnay. We're drinking its little brother, of course. Not that this is anything to sneeze at. The Banana Belt microclimate is really quite fascinating. There's a great picture. So that's actually the vineyard where we grow our Chard, which is the northernmost vineyard. It's about 6 miles north of the tasting room in a little town called Valois. And then we source from a handful of other growers actually between there and the tasting room down here in Burdett. So it's all Eastside Seneca Lake fruit. And like Ben was saying, you know, we've got the slopes, we've got the angle of the sunlight, especially the direct afternoon sunlight's a lot more intense. So the microclimate conditions here are really, really fascinating. Seneca Lake is like a really, really cool body of water and how it affects the growing around it. You know, there will be days, and I still live over on Cayuga Lake. You know, there will be days where I drive out of the Cayuga Lake Valley up over the hill down into the Seneca Lake Valley, and, you know, it'll be snowing a quarter of a mile that way. And then there will be a line in the road where the snow just stops because it's like a 2-degree air temperature difference. Mm-hmm. And, you know, as we all know, it's only a degree difference between ice and water. And that little bit of extra zhuzh goes a long way, as Ben can attest to for sure. So, yeah, so this we actually over vintaged this vintage because of COVID and et cetera, et cetera. So we weren't moving through it as fast as we were before. So this actually did about 12 months in barrel, whereas historically we usually do 7 to 8. Like I said, it's all second, third use and neutral oak barrels, generally speaking.
So you did a great job of answering my question already. And I think it's actually great that you are boots on the ground in the tasting room. I think that is really, for me, just as important as, the winemaker perspective. Really, you are the mouthpiece for the wines that are being made. And you're also, really the best person to get the feedback from the people that are really drinking it, which is awesome. And so my question was, should Chardonnay be getting the same amount of attention as Riesling, and why? And I think you answered that. I even said, what does the future look like? And I think the future is bright for Chardonnay. I think you think that too.
Yeah, I think so too. And I have to say, not to get into too much of the business, I want to stay focused on the wine as proper for these things, but I have noticed, it's been a noticeable uptick in Chardonnay consumption from the tasting room in the past 2 years, for sure. And I don't know if it's, took the words out. I don't know if it was specific to the vintage, because of course, doing this where we do it, we get a lot of vintage variation, which we celebrate. And answer to your question before, it always starts with the fruit. So there's no, as I think, as Ben put it, it's not wine by numbers, right? So it changes every year. And I think that's special, and I think it's something to be celebrated. It gives us something new to talk about all the time. And I don't know if it's just Riesling fatigue, or if Chardonnay has just sort of become more prevalent in the conversation to wine consumers. But I've seen Chardonnay really moving lately, which really, again, as a Chardonnay fan, does my heart good for sure. It's something cool. We talk about, Ben talked about balance. We're all about balance. It's not heavily oaked. We only do partial mallow. So it's not like overly buttery vanilla bomb. And it's fun to show people Chardonnays that have this, like, the bright acid component of like this lively mouthfeel. They're almost like dance on the palate sort of things, as opposed to like these rich, heavy, chewy, high alcohol Chardonnays that I think a lot of people just sort of by rote associate with the variety. Very
good. Alex, Ben, questions, comments, thoughts?
Yeah, no, it's seeing a lot of evolution in the Damiani Chardonnay. It's exciting to see the move more and more to, like a longer, slower natural fermentation. I echo your sentiment. I think that, Chardonnay is seeing an uptick. If ever, I don't know if ever it had a downstroke, really. But I think as we make more and more textural wines, people are really taking notice.
Yeah, it's nice to see that conversation shift, because you've got the depth and complexity of these world-class Rieslings, and Chardonnay has woefully been left out of that conversation, I feel, for a long time. So it's really nice to show people these deep, complex, nuanced Chardonnays that are coming out of the state.
Yeah, I like your comment about that acidity and the integration of the acidity and that aging profile. I think, even if it was kind of a happy accident because of COVID slowdowns or whatever, I think that overwintering or over-vintaging, like, it really shows beautifully in the wine, because it integrates that acid really well. You get that kind of texture from that barrel aging.
Yeah, I totally agree. This is one of my favorites thus far in the years that I've been drinking Damiani wine.
And I mean, I think
I agree. Happy accident, to be sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think to your point about Chardonnay in general is that, like, I think with any region, it takes some level of uniqueness or novelty or whatever, in terms of getting attention and kind of getting people to look closely, and as kind of the premier region for Riesling, I think the Finger Lakes definitely did that, and the focus was on Riesling, and that makes sense. But then I think people take a step back and they realize it's a quality region, right? And they're quality vineyards and quality winemakers and quality growing there, and it goes beyond one variety, and they start to relook at everything. And I think that's where there's a great opportunity for people to look more closely at these Chardonnays, which I think, as you point out, really do such a nice job of integrating that cool climate acidity and showing that brightness, but still richness in texture and balance. So I hope that people continue to look at Chardonnay. I totally expect that they will.
Yeah, definitely. I totally think so too. In all the years these guys have been doing Chardonnay, and I did chat with Phil Davis a little bit about this actually last week when this stuff came up, not knowing that I was actually going to take part in this conversation. And he was just talking about his journey with Chardonnay as a grower and a sourcer of fruit for the winery for so long. And he said he's worked with a lot of different growers over the years, and he is, as I think the word he used was, universally impressed with the Chardonnay that he's been able to get his hands on. And this is over the course of almost 20 years. So if that doesn't speak to the quality of the fruit coming out of this region, I don't really know what does, because that man's been working vineyards for over 60 years of his life. So he would know.
Awesome. Hey guys, how's this vintage going? How's 2021 shaping up?
It's a jungle out there, literally. I mean, it's been incessant rain. I don't know about Long Island. I don't know, Alex, how are you guys making out with the hurricane that just rolled through?
I was super worried about it, but we ended up being fine. It went a little bit further east. It was supposed to be direct. It went further east, so we were okay. So everything was fine there. But I never like to talk about a vintage before the wine's in the bottle. I mean, like, some people say not until harvest. I'm like, no. I'm going to wait till it's bottled before I talk about the vintage. But I mean, yeah, it's been wet. It's been hot. I think June, July were the most humid June, July months on record in the Eastern Long Island. So, like, it's been wet. It's been hot. But at the end of the day, I always think that, at least on the East End, I mean, our vintages always come down to September, October. So those are the two critical months for us. If we get those beautiful kind of blue sky, sunny falls, then it's an awesome vintage. And fortunately, we've had a handful of those. 2018 was not a vintage like that for us. It was pretty wet in the fall, but hopefully for us, fingers crossed that we can have a nice, long, warm, sunny fall to kind of ripen all that fruit and keep everything clean.
Yeah, 18 was a monster. We had, like, I refer to 2018 as the Great Deluge. We had biblical flooding. It was pretty rough. That's what Ben was talking about with that Chardonnay. But yeah, I mean, this year, from everything I know that it's growth explosion. It's been tough to keep up with, in part because the vineyards have seen a serious labor shortage, as have many industries, as we all know. So it took some wrangling to get the vineyards under control, especially when we were, shoot thinning and tying and things, these really critical stages to the growing season. And all of a sudden, we had 1/10 of the bodies we needed out there doing it. So it was a bit of a scramble to get it all together, but I know that it's all come together nicely. And, now it's just as is pretty typical of the Finger Lakes fighting disease pressure is sort of that's the monster we're battling right now. But, but so far so good. Like Alex said, September, October, I'll get back to you.
Good. So a few questions. We got a couple minutes to go, but we have a few questions in the Q&A, so I want to cruise through them. Also, I'm kind of I've got one eye on the chat box, and the conversation just over about sparkling wines is awesome, and so I'm glad you guys are getting the opportunity to taste these wines, because they're really cool, and we're talking about vintages going back over 10 years, and it's exciting to see those wines, available to folks. Super cool. Is there, this is probably best directed to Ben, is there a particular Chardonnay clone that works well in the Finger Lakes because of the cool climate there?
I mean, it's an interesting question. I've spent a lot of time following Pinot Noir around the globe, and, about 10 years ago when I was in New Zealand, everyone talked about clones all the time. And now you listen to a Kiwi winemaker and they're like, well, our vines are a little bit older now. And really, I don't think it matters what the hell clone you have. You know, I would say a lot of our clonal selection here was probably based more towards a sparkling program. The real founder of the region, Charles Fournier, was of Veuve Clicquot kind of like lineage before he moved here to work in Hammondsport. So he probably went in the 50s when he was getting people to plant Chardonnay, probably had sparkling in mind. And I love working with, you know, these older vineyards. I can find Chardonnay that was planted in the 70s and get access to it. And, you know, these rural growers in the brave new world in the 70s, I don't think they really knew what the hell they were planting, speaking clonally. You know, if I were to plant, I might be interested in some of the California heritage clones, maybe because they're just so like what I was working with at Williamson was very rich, but you know, again, let's get it in the ground and just foster these vines until they have some real vine age, and then we'll probably all be in great shape.
Yep. And Ben, we touched on this earlier, but just to recap, Andrew was just asking about the aging regime on your wine, and we're talking large format oak barrels exclusively, and with a mix of age. Yeah.
Yeah. Almost all 400 liter barrels ferment in there, stay on gross fermentation lees, and then I rack about a month before bottling and spend a little time in the tank to finish the wine prior to bottling. So it's about an 8-month oak regime.
Great. And then we've got one more. Where does, commercially speaking, New York State, where does Chardonnay fit in relative to other varieties? And I know we've kind of been talking about this kind of broadly speaking throughout, you know, and I think as a retailer myself, you guys have been, I stock more Chardonnay, different bottles of Chardonnay than any other white grape variety, and so you guys have been doing a great job on answering these tough questions that I'm posing to you. Is Chardonnay not cool and things like that? And really, for me, it's just there is so much more wine available at the moment. You know, there's more fine wine being made in the world and in different places, and the access to it has never been so good. And then we have absolutely seen, you know, a resurgence or a dedication towards native varieties, indigenous grapes, things like that. And so I love Chardonnay, but how does it fit into the conversation when there's so much else going on now?
Just to chime in, I mean, I think Chardonnay is really core to the East End, and I think it is a little bit of a different conversation perhaps in the Finger Lakes. But I mean, Chardonnay really is, I think, the flagship white variety of the East End of Long Island. I think we do well. We've been doing it continuously since the 1970s. I mean, a lot of those heritage and hybrid varieties aren't necessarily part of our history on the East End, right? I mean, we've been farming mostly vinifera consistently due to the more moderate climate, whereas Chardonnay, I mean, was one of those original varieties planted by the Hargraves in the late 1970s, and has really kind of been the principal white variety of our region for our entire history. So I think Chardonnay, and then of course the Bordeaux Reds, are really kind of core to our identity as a region.
Yeah, and I think, and Alex, you're right, the conversation about Chardonnay is a little different as far as I'm aware. Majoritively, the most of the Chardonnay that was originally planted here was, and anybody correct me if I'm wrong, but was mostly planted for sparkling wine. And then it's just kind of taken off and grown from there. But again, you know, as more people come to the region and find what we have to offer, you know, in this little heart-shaped box we call the Finger Lakes, you know, I think people are genuinely surprised at the quality of the wines coming out of here. And another thing I try to remind people is that by and large, in the grand scheme of the wine world, the Finger Lakes is still a pretty young wine region, all told, you know. So it only keeps getting better as far as I'm concerned. And I genuinely really liking the Rieslings bring them here. And then once they're here, we turn them on all the other good stuff that's coming out of here, you know.
Chardonnay keeps them coming back.
If God willing, I try. I do try. I
Keep
feel like I'm a
fighting
dealer
that good fight.
sometimes. I'm like, you sure you don't want to try it? Because I'm buying here. It's not, this bottle's not drinking itself. Stuff like that.
Gentlemen, before we close out, any final closing thoughts, shameless plugs, anything like that? Everybody feeling good?
Well, I've got less than a case left of that reserve Chardonnay, so it's on the website. I know I saw it pop up in the chat before. I'm sorry I didn't speak to it directly, but I think somebody asked the difference between the reserve Chard and the regular. The biggest difference was it was a small lot with the reserve Chard. It was 2 puncheons worth of wine. The first time we've ever used brand new French oak barrels, 1 medium toast, 1 light toast, and it was over vintage, 18 months of barrel time. Biggest difference. So ageability was what we were going for on that guy.
Yeah. On a similar note, I think our distributor Skurnik just picked up the last pallet of our 2017 Chardonnay. So we've got a little bit of that left in the tasting room, but then going to probably transition onto the new vintage pretty shortly. So which is always exciting. Our next vintage of the estate is going to be 19, not 18.
I got the same problem. Y'all drank the 18 and I'm sold out. But my distributor has it. You'll find it in New York and Atlanta and what have you. But the 19, I think, has an even better oak integration. I saw my friend Tomohiro was drinking that tonight with fresh sashimi. And to whomever had the question about food pairings, forgive me. I just, I've been bottling all day and I can't even. I would love to just have a sandwich right now.
All right. Well, we're going to let you go get that sandwich, my friend. Guys, it was an absolute pleasure leading today's class. I've probably done about a half a dozen over the last year or so, and this is definitely one of my favorites. To everyone that's joining us from all over the place, I hope you leave the session with a newfound desire and unquenchable thirst to seek out more New York State Chardonnay. There are so many amazing ones to taste, so get on it. If you have additional questions you'd like to ask offline of any of our producers or myself, please don't hesitate to connect through the team at the New York State Wine and Grape Foundation. You can follow all the producers and New York Wines on social media. You can find me on Instagram at dbcheesynyc and at goodwinexgoodpeople. Guys, thank you all so much for joining us and have a great rest of the week.
Even in the Bible.
This has been another episode of Exploring the Wine Glass. Thanks for listening. If you have suggestions on what topics you would like me to discuss, please reach out on social media. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook as Exploring the Wine Glass. I am also on LinkedIn as Lori Hoytbud. Of course, you can always email me at exploringthewineglass@gmail.com. If you enjoyed what you heard, please rate, review, and subscribe to help others find me more easily. And most importantly, tell your wine-loving friends, because if you like the podcast, they will too. Music is Wine by Kevens. Until next week, Sláinte.